Hello and welcome to A Kind of Meadow with Rhiannon Vaughn. I'm your host, Rhiannon Vaughn, and this is a podcast about healing. Each week, we follow our guest on a journey through time and space as they undergo energy work around a specific topic of their choosing. While the healings will have a similar flow and process and sometimes imagery that's specific to my energy work practice, each session will be highly specific and unique to the guests who have been so kind and vulnerable to share this journey with you. This week in the meadow, we have my beloved friend, Jamison Scala. Jamison is the epitome of a sunny disposition. He truly just brightens the day with his wonderful humor and brilliant smile. What I love about Jamison is that while he is bright and fun so much of the time, he can still hold space for dark vulnerability. I've had many late night dance parties in his living room, but it was in the light of day that I appreciate the most. Jamison put together an accountability group about 7 years ago, and every week our group met up in his living room to set goals, and basically we held a group therapy session around our struggles with being in that artist life. The accountability part was helpful, but it really was the time that we spent talking through literally anything that came up that week that was truly magical. Every week, Jamison warmly shared his home with us, ready to hold space and moderate time. So it made complete sense to me when Jamison wanted to do a session around going after what he wants. He mentioned that he loves to encourage others to go after what they want, but has a really hard time doing the same for himself. Ultimately, he wanted to address this fear of failure professionally that keeps him from just going for it. This topic was so relatable, so relatable. I was very excited to dive in. But before I could do the session for Jamison, I was actually called to do a healing on myself. Sometimes that happens. We need to make space to hold space. In my healing, I was taken to a hammock in the mountains where I was stargazing as a teenager. I spent a lot of time drinking Sonic hot cocoa and making wishes on shooting stars with my cousin. So this was a familiar place for me. In the container, I saw a shooting star and made a wish per usual, but this time I was guided to follow the star. It led me to a bowl full of all of the stars I had ever made wishes on. I was tasked with unraveling the wish from each star, which looked like a ribbon of paper wrapped around a rock. And on the ribbon was the wish written out by hand. It was time to throw the wishes in the fire and actually take a look at the unmet needs underneath them. Once the wishes were transmuted, the rocks began to glow and revealed what I was really asking for. Validation, connection, love, to be seen, to be adored. I mean, I was a teenager and there were definitely wishes about crushes in there. I was an orphan at that point, and I think it can be really hard to acknowledge, I need love and validation. I mean, it's painful even, but it was very fun to wish for so-and-so to ask me to the dance. That's very teen, right? Whimsical even. I was a teenager and not an orphan when I made those wishes. But of course, now it was time to connect with the pain of what I was really longing for and turn inward to get it. But inward doesn't mean alone. That was the big lesson of this healing. I think sometimes when I think of don't look externally for validation or externally for X, Y, and Z, it was really easy for me to believe that I needed to go out and go after it and get it myself and fill it myself or whatever that means. But I was actually being shown that that's not necessarily the way to get your needs met either. Going inward actually meant that I needed to just connect with the need itself and own it. Be responsible for getting it met, sure, but I could ask for help. I could ask the earth to hold me and love me and validate me. I could also ask a person to hold me, love me, and validate me. I was shown that it's not up to someone else whether or not I get my needs met, and that I can meet my needs by asking for help. I think I was someone who would ask, and if the first response that I got was no, I would give up on it. I would just think, well, I better shove this aside or I'm not worthy of getting my needs met, and leave it up to whatever this external source was rather than owning it, than it being up to me. And again, I thought it was one extreme to the other. So if it was up to me, it means that I need to validate myself. But ultimately, I can meet my needs by asking for help. Not everyone will say yes, but someone will, even if it's just the moon. So this subtle shift was enough to remove that sense of helplessness I felt. It didn't solve my unmet needs necessarily, but it did help with that invisible feeling that I was trying to curb, which is feeling utterly helpless. So I went through each need in the bowl and called on different people to help me meet it. There were some I could handle myself, but there were many that I just needed to reach out for. I was so scared to ask. And even thinking about it now, it feels like I feel so weak that I could be devoured simply by asking. But the more that I asked, the safer that it felt. I started with asking the earth because her love is just so big and unconditional. But what I love is that it's still a relationship and she still requires an ask. And then I could ask the trees and the flowers. Eventually I worked up and I could ask humans. I went through the entire bowl of stars. And once it was empty, I had so much space that the possibilities felt endless. My dreams and desires could go beyond the basics. And I had space to be curious about what I could do and who I could be. My dreams went from what someone else could do and be to me to what I could do and be. I was powerless to what someone else will do, but now I felt fully empowered to move as me. Once that healing was done, it was time to meet Jamison in his healing container. When I first arrived, it was this really gorgeous canyon landscape. Think bottom of the Grand Canyon, lush green against deep red rock. Waiting for me was this little donkey with little sacks on his back. And I knew that I was going to take a ride through this canyon to meet Jamison. What was interesting about that is that it was new. Usually I meet with someone where the session is meant to take place, but not this time. I was given a ride with a beautiful view. I felt like a tourist on an excursion. So that's where we begin, on a donkey traveling through this majestic canyon to get to Jamison, where we'll explore going after what he wants. We're going down, down deep. And we went down, down, down until we got to a cave. And that's where you greeted me, at the mouth of the cave. It was in that moment that I realized, oh, the donkey ride was something that you had arranged because you wanted me to have a really nice view or a beautiful view or have a nice time before we got into the work, which I'm so sorry is going to be dark. You had this feeling of like, I'm so sorry. This is so awful. Let me at least give you a good time. I promise I'll make it up to you. I hope this is okay. Yeah, it was like you had to make it up to me before. It didn't feel like you were buttering me up in any way, because that's like a different energy or intention, right? It was more this feeling of, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry. So then I got off the donkey and I reminded you that I'm here with you. I'm here with you. You're like, oh, okay. And so then you brought me inside the cave. I will say I laughed so much during the session because you were like so accommodating, so hospitable, and you were being you were being so warm and funny, cracking jokes, making sure I was okay. It was fun. It was really fun. That's just the energy that's coming off of you. And so it was fun. I giggled. It was great. Then you're like, okay, let's go inside the cave. And I walk inside the cave and then it cut to you and you had like installed curtains as a door for this cave. And it was a giant, massive cave in the Grand Canyon or something. And somehow you like took these curtains and you made sure no one was following or watching. And then you like closed it. But it was very like we were in Hillary Duff or Hannah Montana or something like very Disney, silly and cute. But what that revealed to me was that there is maybe a little bit of a distance between what is on the surface and what is on the inside, what you're like the parts of yourself that you're willing to share with people. Then there are parts of yourself that you're like, oh, no one should see this. I really understood that aspect. And it's not necessarily that like, oh, it's shameful or it's awful, so I have to hide it. That wasn't the feeling I got. So the way that I felt that this closing of the curtains was more of this understanding. It's almost like you have tried to air this or talk about it casually or just let it exist as part of your world, but it was a bummer or it hurt people and that made you feel unsafe. And like, no, but I'm not a bummer. Like, no, I'm not. See, I'll show you. I'm not a bummer. And so, yeah, it came from that place, which again is why I felt like the donkey ride was in there so that it was like, at least if you're bummed out, at least you had that beautiful view, right? That was the feeling, and not necessarily that it's like secretive or private or I need my privacy, but because it feels unsafe to reveal it otherwise. And that safety is kind of just about how other people react.
Yeah, that was interesting to me. That idea of like I try to make people feel comfortable around me and have a good time and this and that. And so I could see me in real life being like, sorry, this one's just going to be a bummer. So I, in fact, sometimes in therapy, I'll be like, I'm just gonna let you know it's going to be a rough session.
Oh, no.
Like I get a warning.
Yeah.
But that's their job. But anyway,
we entered the cave and it was really dark. So you turn on some lights and it was beautiful light setting. You know, I've been to your apartments, like the hue lights.
I mean, I have my hue lights on right now. It's giving me this glow.
It's like a warm TV fire crackling in the background. There's some music. You offer me refreshments. You want to make sure that I'm comfortable in this deep, dark cave of yours. Then we were called to take all of these decorations that you had put up in this cave to make people feel better. We were told that you needed to put it in the fire. This lighting system, music system. It was a whole fucking living room. So you threw a whole living room into the fire, and the living room is heavy. It serves you in so many capacities, but we're talking about how do you connect to really going after what you want. And so this is a mechanism to make sure that people feel comfortable so that you're palatable. You don't need to carry the weight of that. And in this case, the weight of a whole living room. So we release these objects and it takes the weight out of our energy field. It takes the density out of our energy field, and the fire transmutes it so that energy goes from being this like solid heavy mass to being light, and it can be recycled and be used to create new things. There was this aspect of you caught in a loop. We needed to undo this loop and release this version of you so that he/you could be in present time. We ended up back in time. You were probably like 7 or 8, and you were sitting on the ground with your knees to your chest, and you were you weren't hiding. It didn't feel like you were hiding, but you were with some coats. I could see the bottoms of coats at your head. It was this place where you went for refuge. I went to go open the door of the closet and you were like, no, stop. And you were scared. Whatever was on the other side of that door was what you were seeking refuge from. And it wasn't for me to see in that moment. And so you cleared the way of the coats. You like spread them apart and opened up the back of the wardrobe was, of course, a little tunnel to a magical world, very much like The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe.
This is going to blow your mind. Okay, growing up, I had 2 closets. And there were two small closets, and it was where the house slopes. So they were like mirrors of each other. So they were two small, pretty shallow closets. And in the back of each closet was another little door. And the closets were linked by a little attic that linked them in the back of it. And it's just so weird that you would mention it. And I would like made a little fort in that attic. And I would like sometimes hang out in there.
Oh
Infrequently though, because it was like insulated, so it was like,
it was like fiberglass. Yeah, that was the snow.
So as you were saying this, I was like, "Oh my god, it's my childhood closet." It really. I don't know if there is any connection to it, but I mean that was the setup of those closets.
Yeah,
there were two small closets with a small door.
Oh my god,
on the back of them. Yeah.
Oh, I feel really psychic right now.
It blew my mind.
Did you find refuge in that spot?
No, it doesn't. I mean, it's interesting. One closet, my mom had her coats hanging. There was it was a cedar closet. My dad must have put cedar panels. And then the other closet was mine. And, I had all my little like trinkets and toys in there. So I guess, yeah, to a degree I did. I had my little things and books and like my dress up clothes, which I loved as a kid. Oh, okay. And, like my shoes and things. Yeah, but there wasn't any particular, I don't know, I can't really pinpoint a particular memory to it. Although, as I got older, a lot of my like memory boxes and things were in there. So, some trophies and stuff, not from sports.
Yeah.
So that kind of stuff was in there.
What's interesting about healing in general and why I really like this format, sometimes I think what gets in the way of processing a feeling is the like logical thing that happened where emotions are not necessarily logical. And so in a way, it doesn't need to be linked to a moment in time, but there's something about that closet or who you were in that closet, and it literally holds your memories. So even the fact that it's this space where you could play and it holds your memories, it makes it the symbol of the emotions or this package of memories.
It makes sense. It makes sense.
One of my favorite things that Joseph Campbell talks about is the value of metaphor in stories. And so he talks about how like the plot of a story connects with our conscious mind. Everything about a story, really, like what's happening, who's the characters, what's the setting, connects with our conscious minds, but it's the symbols and metaphors that connect with our subconscious mind. And our conscious mind in a way is a defense. It protects us. It helps us feel safe because we know things or we can analyze things. But our subconscious mind is where everything is, all the parts of us that we can't necessarily hold in our conscious mind.
Yeah.
We go into this magical world. It's covered in snow. It's like blanketed in beautiful white snow. It's very bright. We had gone from this like really dark closet into this really bright, snowy, open field. And no one was there. It wasn't even like creatures hiding or anything. It was just an empty field, barely any trees. And I started the Reiki session. So I start at your head. I was guided to go to your brain. Yours looked pristine. Your brain looked so beautiful and pink and healthy and perfect. I was like, oh my God, I don't think we need to replace anything. But then I noticed that it was so clean. It was missing flowers. And I say this because after I do work with a brain, I can tell that it's healed when the flowers start popping out of the brain and the flowers are like ideas blossoming. It looked like perfect, but then it was missing that like blossoming that really brings it to life. And so upon closer look, I noticed that your brain had been covered in like a plastic coating or something. Your brain is intact because it's been so protected, but the cost of that was it was missing this like blossoming. And blossoming is like, sure, it's having an idea or having inspiration, but it's also that energy of when a seed bursts open and then the roots digging into the ground and the stem rising out of the earth and the flower looking for the sun. And so it's that drive that comes from the blossoming as well. So we knew that we were going to have to throw the wrapper in the fire, but you were concerned because you were very young. But even like the grown-up version of you was like, I don't know, won't that cause harm? I'm not comfortable with this. So we brought up lots of earth energy to make sure that you felt supported and acknowledged and sat with this fear of being hurt or damaged. Then when it was time, we took it off and threw it in the fire. And then you felt so exposed, so vulnerable, like your head was just open. It just felt overwhelmingly vulnerable. So we let you kind of sit in that vulnerability and made sure that you knew that you weren't alone. You had all these guides around you. And then we're in this like snowy field, right? So then the snow kind of opens up around you and then the ground starts to open up around you. It was calling for this 7-year-old version of you to lay down and be held by the earth. Like we were planting the seed that was you. We were burying this version of you that felt so scared and vulnerable and fragile. The earth wanted to hold you. So you laid down, 7-year-old, you laid down into the earth and then it wrapped its warm soil around you and you just felt held by Mother Earth and it wasn't scary anymore. And so then you relaxed into it. And as you relaxed, you started to disintegrate into the soil. And it was like the body of 7-year-old you was decomposing, but it didn't look like decomposing. It looked really beautiful. It became the mycelial network that then fruited into a mushroom. And then grown-up you today went and plucked the mushroom and ate it. That's the way that you were going to integrate this version of you back into yourself. And I think by integrating this version of you back, we pulled him out of that time loop of that day, which felt like that moment was holding him hostage. And now he was free to come see where life had ended up forward in time. And so that was really healing for 7-year-old you. Suddenly, you were the one standing there with the exposed brain. And it still looked pristine, but now the plastic was off and you were the one feeling really vulnerable. So we kind of let you sit in that vulnerability a little bit and we called in what you needed. We called in resources for what you needed. So you felt exposed, you felt vulnerable, you felt like you could be in danger. And so we brought up earth energies to support you. And we brought earth energies all the way up like to your heart. And what that looks like, we brought up like a column of earth around you. So you were like hugged by the dirt, basically. So then I was called to sprinkle some dirt on top of your brain. And I understood what was happening, but you didn't know. And so you were like, okay, what's going on? That's fine. But you didn't really want to say anything yet. And it wasn't a lot of dirt. So you're like, okay, I could let this slide, I guess, but ew. And you went to go wipe it off, but you weren't allowed to. So then you got a little bit more upset.
I don't like kind of the mess of things. I like things in order. I like things in their places. I like to present kind of as nicely as I can. So that's not it's not a far-fetched connection for me.
Then we sprinkled compost and fertilizer. And so it smelled like poop. And so you're like, you are putting literal shit on my brain, on my exposed head. Let me go wipe it off. But you couldn't. You had this really strong urge to swat the shit away to clean it, just to like take care of it. And I was like, I'm sorry, but this is part of the process.
Eek. Right. And it was interesting you were talking about it being shit, right?
Yes.
That's what I'm sort of making that connection. I'm like, maybe this is a connection to my stomach. And of course, it reminds me of my IBS. And, like as a kid, I had such a nervous stomach. It was always an inconvenience to people. I was always nervous about it. I was nervous I was going to have to ask to go to the bathroom. Then being nervous would make me have to go to the bathroom. And it was like this terrible cycle. It always felt like an inconvenience. So I'm wondering if there's a connection to that too. That was something that was like really, I had to kind of like work through and figure out and kind of, I just always had such a weak stomach. I remember distinctly kind of a moment in time where I was like, I can talk about this with people. And it kind of freed up a lot of the anxiety connected to it. But I was always scared to say I had to go to the bathroom, even though, I mean, if I was with someone and I was like, I have to go to the bathroom, they would be like, no,
right.
It was never that. But, again, we kind of create these own stories. And especially in school, and if I had gone to the bathroom once already, I was like, I can't ask to go again. And, there was a lot of anxiety wrapped up in the bathroom always. I mean, me and my whole family, sorry, family, I'm outing you. We're a bathroom family. And we all have nervous stomachs. So that was kind of a big part of being young too. And I'm wondering if there's a connection to that as well.
Oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so you're like, okay, I need a minute. And you walked away. We're in this like meadow again that's like full of snow. So you walked a little distance. There are no trees really, so we could still see you. And you went off to the edge and you had a full tantrum. I don't know if you've seen the movie Ever After, but there's a part when the stepsister finds out that it's Drew Barrymore that the prince is in love with. And so she's like, excuse me for a moment. And she goes and she stomps around and has a fit. And then when she comes back, she's like, pardon me, that was a bee. That was kind of what you did. And so you walked back very pissed about the shit on your head. And I had to finish the process, which is after you add compost to the soil, then you really want to water it in. So we put this holy water that I work with, we poured that on your head. Then you were even more like steaming mad because now there's wet shit running down your face. And so we were just there to let you experience all these feelings because the urge to fix it, to push it away, to clean it gets rid of that feeling of whatever's bubbling up underneath the surface. But when you don't get to push it away because it is there, it's part of life, your life, this moment or whatever, it created space for those feelings to actually show up instead of releasing the pressure valve. So you don't necessarily have to experience those feelings. So you were getting to feel all this rage. And so then while you were angry, your guides set up this rage room in this meadow. And so there were these white pillars, and on each pillar was a glass sculpture, like it was clear glass. It almost looked like ornaments because there was no color in anything, just a bunch of clear glass. And you were given a bat and you got to go around and just smash the shit out of all of these ornaments.
I'm not sure about the rage. I mean, listen, I'm in my car screaming at people, but I think everyone is. I think maybe in life, my kind of general frustration is a seemingly lack of consideration for other people. Like people just kind of traverse the world completely unaware that they're, interacting with other people and how their actions affect people. And I try very hard to think about how my actions affect other people. And that's always a frustration of mine. So I'm wondering if there's that connection.
Well, I will say that the reason that the rage room showed up was because, okay, so you couldn't take care of this situation and the shit was running everywhere. Couldn't clean it up. You felt very angry. So underneath the like drive to fix it is this anger. And I think in these healings, when I'm just supposed to hold space for whatever emotion is coming up, sometimes it's because it is a suppressed emotion that isn't necessarily safe to express. And so It's okay. Like if it doesn't connect, if you don't feel that there's rage under there, that's fine too. Of course, it is what it is. But it felt like in this moment, in this plane, in this part of your subconscious or whatever this is, you got to release all of that so you don't have to release it from your body. And so when you were done, you were kind of like sitting in the middle of this mess that you had made, fully wiped out. And underneath the anger, underneath the rage was this sadness, this grief. And so you started to cry and you're just surrounded by shards of glass. And then while you're crying, another one of these clear glass sculptures comes down and it's in the shape of a heart. It floats down into your hands. You look at it for a moment and you realize that it's your heart. For a second, you want to be precious with it, but then you start to have these feelings jump up again. And so you take the heart and you smash it on the ground. It's almost like you saw how fragile it was, and that's what pissed you off. And so because of that, you took this like fragile little thing and smashed it to pieces before it could be smashed by anyone else.
I think we as humans, we do our best and we take risks, and I feel kind of confident in taking risks, but there's of course always just this like, I don't want to have to pick myself up off the floor if it doesn't work out. Like just kind of anticipating what could happen, which is not necessarily a great thing. And certainly it's worth the risks, and a lot of times it's worth it. But just kind of this idea of, I don't want to have to do this because I don't want to have to just pick myself back up again.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if there's that. I think that would make sense, that a fear of anything is, well, how will this turn out? And am I going to have to like get it all back together? And I mean, the answer, I guess, just is, of course, you'll always have to kind of get it all together. And I feel confident that I'm able to do that, but it's like sometimes I don't want to do that. It's like getting over someone, getting over a crush or something. It's like, well, I know I'm going to, but I just don't want to have to do the work.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if that's...
Yes. That makes total sense, because you were also sitting there surrounded by the shard, like the pieces. The pieces were just kind of sitting around you.
Yeah.
Once it was smashed, it released this little wispy heart. It kind of looked like smoke, but it was in the shape of a heart, and it started dancing around and dancing around you. You were angry with it. It's like you knew who this little wispy heart was. And I asked if it was an entity, and I was told no, that it is your heart energy, but it's outside of you instead of inside of you. And it's almost like you banished this energy outside of you. So that's why it's easy to like give to other people, because it's this energy that's floating around you. But it's really important that that heart energy is inside for you, and we let that fill you up, and then that heart energy comes out of your hands instead of existing just outside of your field. But you were pissed. You didn't even want to look at this wispy heart. It was like, wait. So I couldn't really hear what it was saying, but it was trying to talk to you. You would turn your back to it. And so finally it was like, okay, we're going to have to do a mediation of some kind. And so these couches appeared, and it was like couples therapy between you and your heart, but it was this wispy heart energy. And so you guys sat down, and again, your body language was like a little bit just tilted enough away that we got the point that you were like, I am here, but I am not engaging with you. And so then the therapist showed up, and the therapist was the Snow Queen. I don't know who the queen is in The White Queen in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And she was massive. Like, you felt really small. She was probably 10 feet tall in this situation. She came in and there was trumpets announcing her, and she had the most amazing, huge, audacious gown. I loved it. She had this really stern face, very much like, I think Tilda Swinton was the one in the movie, right? So she came with her clipboard and she sat down to mediate this couples therapy between you and your heart. And I was like, oh, cool. And she kind of just took over at that point. She had a very massive presence. She was someone who really commanded respect. Like, she didn't even have to say anything. She could just throw a glance. And so I started to let her lead the therapy session, but it was a little bit strange. She was really cold and not necessarily listening. She was just kind of controlling the conversation. And so then I checked in and I was like, is she an entity? And the answer I got was yes. When there's an entity, we move to this quarantine tent. If you would like to hear the full entity removal of the Ice Queen, head to our Patreon and join the Perpetual Meadows, where you can get bonus content, which this week will include the full entity removal with a conversation around how those typically work. But for now, we're going to jump a little bit ahead in time. You were kind of uncomfortable with her discomfort. And so all of a sudden you turned into a court jester. She was the queen and you were her court jester. So you started like dancing around and being silly. It wasn't you at all. It was being silly in the way that a court jester would be, like a fool. You were dancing to try to ease the tension because this Ice Queen had so much tension. The thing about the fool is that the fool is someone that really is wise. The fool is always really getting to the heart of it, but because of their status, it may or may not be listened to. The fool gets to say what's really going on without the threat of death, as long as it's in the tone of, but I don't know anything, I'm just a fool. It's like a safety thing. When we realized that this jester was connected to this Ice Queen and she was really, it wasn't that she was pulling the strings because you didn't show up like a puppet. It was that her presence was so massive and so cold, and she wouldn't give us anything, that it was like this strategy that you used for safety. And so we brought in a fire and you took off the jester costume and threw it in the fire and released that. You were ready to let that go. And then once you let that go, you kind of like all of a sudden hung upside down. Like it was like you were a tarot card of the fool. And then when you let go of the costume, then the card went upside down and now you were the hangman. And you were like, no, 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 no. So it got really scary because in your mind, so if you take one wrong step and it can end with you being not just killed, but executed, that really raises the stakes. So you were, I don't know what the thing's called, but like the little, when you play the game Hangman and you draw the little 7, it was that made of wood, that 7. So we took that and we threw that in the fire. We talked about how really the hangman in the tarot is not about punishment. It's about enlightenment. And really it's about letting go and this leap of faith. We let you see that the noose was not around your neck. It was around your foot and it was holding you steady. But you imagined that there was a noose around your neck. So there was. So then we took the noose off and threw that in the fire. This is when the Ice Queen started to open up. So she was like, oh, you think you've got it bad. So it was very like swooping in and one-upping you. Oh, you think you've got it bad. If I make one wrong move, off with her head. She was so afraid of making a misstep. And for her, it wasn't even just if I make a mistake, off with her head. It's that if I am walking on the lawn and I trip, I'll appear weak, and then off with her head. So any appearance of weakness was her threat of ultimately her life, and not just, again, death by accident or like death by sickness. It was death by execution in front of everyone. Because that's the thing about these hangings, right? And that's the thing about the guillotine, right? Is that it didn't happen in private. It happened in the town centers on a stage so everyone could see it. So again, the stakes were really high. We took the guillotine and threw that in the fire for her. We released the threat of execution that was hanging over both of your heads. And then we held space for you and her to make mistakes.
Oof. I definitely fear making mistakes, so I get that.
Oh, really?
Oh, completely. Yeah, like a lot of times I'll put things off because I don't want to make the wrong choice. you know? So
Of course, yeah.
I'll just make no choice. And like living in that space feels like a safer space than actually making a choice and it possibly being the wrong choice.
Oh, and this is exactly what you are talking about with wanting to go
Completely.
after what you want.
100%. Like, is this the right thing to do? I'll only know unless I try. But then sometimes I'm like, it's just more comfortable to live in the space of like, well, we haven't even tried yet, so we don't know. Which seems so silly to say. It's so silly, but yeah.
I mean, I think it's really relatable and universal. And even the way that you're describing it, it almost feels like, well, I can still make this decision. It's not that I'm saying no, it's just on the horizon. I can make the decision at any moment. Just give me a minute.
Yeah.
We took off her armor, which was in the form of this gown. It was really big and stiff and hard to move. I mean, she was so afraid of appearing weak that she barely moved at all. It was just a slight turn of the head, a slight turn of the eye. That was her safety mechanism, because if she moved too big, then she might trip over. She might look goofy. She might whatever. So everything was so contained that she was almost like turning to stone. We kind of let you lead her in the situation because it was almost like she needed to watch you go through the process. We did make you do things that made you feel ridiculous. And so I suggested Kundalini yoga. I don't know if you've done that before, but when I first started doing Kundalini yoga, I learned very quickly of my own self-consciousness and judgments around looking foolish, because the moves aren't like, yoga, you stretch and make these really beautiful lines. But then in Kundalini, you're like flapping and breathing funny and sticking out your tongue. We had to do Kundalini yoga and you kind of like worked through the self-consciousness of it. And again, doing things where I felt like where you feel foolish is wonderful because it does break open the self-consciousness, and self-consciousness feels like stiffness. The way that the Ice Queen was stiff and could barely move anymore was because she was so tightened by self-consciousness. It like turns us to stone. We're so afraid to it makes us afraid to make any move. So when you were doing the Kundalini moves, it started to break apart this stiffness that had started to develop around you. Then we had the Ice Queen. When she watched you do it, she's like, fine, I'll do something, but I won't do that. And so it's almost like she became the Queen of Hearts from Alice in Wonderland, who is like goofy and playing croquet, but it was very cartoonish. She would like swing way too hard at the croquet ball and miss and like spin in a circle. And it's almost like that's what she knew about herself. And that's what she's been hiding and rejecting, was like how clumsy she was. And so we just let her be clumsy and we like had a laugh about it and it was okay. And the more that you guys did foolish things and nothing happened, the safer you started to feel in it. So it was almost like exposure therapy.
It makes sense.
And again, you don't have to make mistakes in the realm where, like, the fact that Kundalini was the thing that came up for you and not stand up, for example, as the place to go make mistakes and practice, makes me think that you don't have to go out and make mistakes in the realm that you're passionate about, that you really care about. You can go somewhere that the stakes are lower, that you don't really care, like a hobby or a sport, if you want to go hit to a batting cage and try to hit softballs or something. Like go someplace like that where you're not good at it or not, you haven't done it before, so you're new at it. And then you can make mistakes there, and that'll build your it'll make it okay. It'll make it feel safe so that you can go out in the place where you love. And it doesn't have to be the only place where you experience this, like, not failure, but newness.
Do you think making mistakes in a safer realm or a safer zone emboldens us to want to feel comfortable making mistakes in other places?
I think so. I think that's the value of hobbies or learning a language even, because there aren't a lot of situations as grown-ups where we just really don't know what we're doing. Mm-hmm. It's easy to avoid places where we really don't know. And something like learning a language reminds us that we don't know everything. Mm. Like, I can't just go out and speak Korean or whatever. I have to start at a toddler level of language. And then when I go out and try to speak at the restaurant, I have to do it wrong. I have to do it bad, but that's also the only way to learn to speak the language. Mm-hmm. And it's really easy to avoid that feeling of the like beginner's mind, I think is what that is, that feeling like a beginner, because I feel like our society tells us a lot, like we're a grown up. We have gone to school. We should know. Mm-hmm. We have the internet. You should know. Mm-hmm. And no, you shouldn't know. It opens us more when we're like, wow, I don't know anything. I don't know what I'm doing. And it makes it, I think that's what makes it feel safer to make a mistake, because it's also in that new mind, beginner's mind. If we can get past the dread of it, the embarrassment of it, all of that, the self-consciousness of it, that's where we can be childlike or naive and open and excited and curious. It brings back curiosity. So I'm not just going like walking on eggshells to find my path. And if I make a wrong turn, I fall off a cliff and I'm dead. It's more like, ooh, what's around this corner? What happens if I try this thing? And it becomes about like love and adventure and excitement instead of like, oh no.
I love that. I love that. I really feel like I needed to hear exactly that. I really connect with that, because I do, like I was saying, fear kind of making the wrong decision. So sometimes I make no decision at all. Oh, yeah. And there can be excitement in all of it.
Yeah.
Someone said to me once the idea of like, you'll fail 100 times before you succeed once, kind of thing. So shouldn't you be excited to like get the failures on the road, right? Like let's start racking up these failures so we can get to the success. And that's not necessarily how my brain is wired. So it's interesting to think about it in that capacity too.
You took your leap of faith, and then instead of falling down the cliff, you actually floated up and started flying into the sky and landed on a cloud up above, where you now had this like eagle-eyed view of this space. And the sense that I got is that from this space, you could kind of see the timeline of your life. And from this perspective, you were told, okay, what is it that you want? What is it that you want for your life? Where do you want to go? And you were like a pen and a pad of paper showed up in your hands, and you were given time to write down a list of the things that you really, really want. Now that you're free from this entity whose energy was very controlling and very self-conscious. So without this control, without this self-consciousness, what is it that you want? So you wrote down the list, and then you came back down. Before it was time to go, we released any vows that were made from the Ice Queen, because the Ice Queen isn't really you, and it's not really 3-year-old you. It's this other energy. So we brought out a fire and let whatever vows this Ice Queen made, and vows are like, I'll never do this again, or I swear I'll blah, 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 blah. And so this Ice Queen's vow showed up naturally like a scroll that a herald would read in the square. And so we threw the scroll into the fire and released you from those vows. And then the baby was free to go. So we bring in angels to guide him on his way to the next phase of his journey. And then this lawyer shows up, and the lawyer makes the announcement that the Ice Queen is gone. And when that announcement happens, all of the snow across the land starts to melt, and it starts to become spring again. The lawyer hands you this like set of keys and a briefcase and is like, you have inherited the castle. At first you were like, oh, no. This is like a thing that you didn't want to happen. And it's almost why you let the Ice Queen stay alive or exist for so long, is because you knew that this is what would happen next, is that you get to inherit the castle. In your mind, you're like, oh, if I inherit the castle, I inherit the pain. I have to become the Ice Queen. Your guides wanted you to know that you do inherit the castle and all of the land. It's yours. It's your life. It's your world, and you can do with it and decorate with it as you wish. And you do not inherit the pain. You get to make this place yours, and you get to change the energy of it in the way that you want. We were going to leave you, redecorating and remodeling the castle. But before that, we wanted to finish out the healing. So we moved to your third eye and, we cleared out anything. Time runs through the third eye, and I see time as a rainbow. And so we let that rainbow of time run through your third eye. And we sent the energy of this healing all the way backwards in time and forwards in time. So all of you had access to the energy of this healing. And then we moved down into your throat, and it turned into this, like the lining of your throat turned into this beautiful opal, so that you can speak from your heart. From your throat, we moved down into your heart space. And so we just kind of cleared everything out, created space to bring back the wispy heart. Remember the wispy? Into your heart center. And so I think it was a wispy. I keep calling it a wispy because that's what it is on the little ghost on Animal Crossing. That's the feeling that I got. And it was like the soul of your heart was floating around outside of you. And it was time to bring it back inside of your heart now that there was all of this space. Your heart space had started out because the soul of your heart was outside. That was the warmth. And because this Ice Queen had kind of occupied your heart space, your chest cavity felt a little bit cold. And then once we brought the wispy in, your heart space started to turn into spring and everything. Well, first it turned into autumn. It went backwards in time. So it became autumn and then summer and then spring. And your heart blossomed into this beautiful rose. And so it was turning spring inside of your heart. It was turning spring in the field all around us. And that's when we noticed that your brain had started to flower. Your brain had started to blossom as well. So you had these flowers growing out of the top of your head. And so then from your heart space, once it was all warm, that feeds into your solar plexus, which is your belly, your power center, your self-expression. So it warmed up your belly space, and we just kind of washed through it with healing light and holy water, and made sure that you were all right. I always see the solar plexus as an island, and there's a version of you that lives on this island. So we brought in your guides to do a workshop, to host a workshop for you on how to identify your dreams, how to identify your wants, and how to identify your needs, and then how to go after them. They gave you that little workshop, which is available to you in your subconscious. And then we just went through the rest of your energy centers with some Reiki energy and love light energy. We made sure that your root felt really safe and stable. I saw roots grow down your legs into the center of the earth to make sure that you were really grounded. And then we put magnets in front and behind you to pull out everything that was ready to be released. We brought in cosmic energy from above and just kind of showered you and cleared your field to make sure that all of the residue from everything that we had done was washed away. And then it was time for you to go back to the castle and really make it yours. That's kind of where I left you. And you were like, okay, I'm doing this. I love this. I'm going to have a good time. See you later. And so we met you in the cave. So you had moved from this cave space into this massive castle, kind of like the king of Narnia. It was really beautiful.
First of all, thank you so much. I was excited to just see what this was.
Oh,
and,
yes.
I believe in your powers.
Oh,
And
thank you.
so I was really curious, and kind of from the get-go, I thought we'd kind of just jumped right into me. And I was giggling when you were talking about kind of the pristine nature of this cave. I was nervous when you started and you said it's dark.
Oh,
I
no.
was like, oh no, here we go.
Do you feel like it was dark after hearing the whole thing?
It wasn't as dark as I thought. It turned out nice. And yeah, it was interesting. Are your readings not usually, or what are your readings usually like?
No, it's usually like that. And ideally I try to get to so if someone wants to work on like career or, reaching for your goal, being able to move towards your goals, ultimately what shows up in the healing are the things that need to be released in order for you to do that. So, if your healing is about being able to go after your goals, then sometimes it's this internalized shame that's in the way. And so we go and we release that so that you're not carrying the weight of that with you as you move forward. And in this case, this Ice Queen represented self-consciousness. I think ultimately at the end of it, what I realized is that she was very, very, very self-conscious. That self-consciousness in a way it doesn't control your movement, but it could restrict your movements. So it's dark in the sense where instead of talking about dreams and goals, we're talking about shame and self-consciousness. And that doesn't mean that it's dark, like abuse or whatever. Yeah. And I don't really see abuse because that's not for me to see. It's none of my business. And even like, it's really easy to have shame. Like, it doesn't mean that something horrible has to happen. It could be that we like farted in class and then, you know what I mean?
I definitely farted in class.
Yeah. And so that can create shame in our bodies. It's all really relative. It doesn't have to be hard. But I think the feeling I got from the healing when you're like, oh, I'm so sorry, it's going to be dark. It was just that it wasn't fun, magical. Let's go on this fun. Like there was for you in that moment, if it's not at a 10 on the joy list, then maybe I'll be uncomfortable with you.
Yeah. 7 was an interesting time. Like a 6-7-year-old me is an interesting time. And even kind of before you labeled that, I was trying to really identify with it. And there wasn't kind of a major shift or event that I felt could be particularly connected to that time. But kind of what I just kept coming back to was this idea of kind of being a different kid, which so many, gay men were and are. And that kind of kept resonating for me. And also it kind of what kept resonating for me was this idea of, and this might be different than a lot of young gay boys, but it was interesting because in my home, I felt incredibly comfortable and incredibly supported. And I come from a large family, and I grew up around a lot of my all of my cousins. And I grew up with them almost like siblings. And I always felt incredibly comfortable with my aunts and uncles and my cousins and my brothers. But at school, I didn't have that kind of connection with people. Like, I was a known kid and I had friends, but I never had like best friends.
Yeah.
And that was where it was kind of clearly obvious that I was different than other kids. And so that's something that kept coming up for me. And also this idea of, my therapist also always references, I think it's a book called The Best Boy or The Good Boy, this idea of gay boys being such good little boys because subconsciously they feel as though they are at they are, it is a disservice to their family. And so they need to make up to their families for it. So they need to be very well behaved and very kind and very polite. And although I don't necessarily feel like I wouldn't feel like my family made me feel that way at all. I think maybe perhaps just, culturally and societally and environmentally, maybe I just felt that on a bigger scale out in the world. Like I had to be a good boy. And so when you were talking about, things in their place and me welcoming you to this cave and it being all nice, that those are kind of the moments that were coming up for me.
Yeah, and there is something, I think...
Excuse me.
Oh, bless you.
Getting out the demons.
I think there is something to be said about internalized shame, especially if we come from a marginalized group, and it's so insidious.
It's interesting to me that it was a 7-year-old, because when I think of that time in my life, I think more of around 5th grade, which I guess would be like 10 or 11-ish. And kind of distinct memories then of I just have this distinct memory of looking at the playground and seeing the boys in the field playing football or something, and then seeing the girls on the asphalt, like playing pretend games, and thinking, well, I want to be with the girls playing pretend games, but I'm supposed to be with the boys on the field. And that kind of dual world and not kind of understanding why I was different. And, kids make up answers in their minds.
Of course.
And I can't really think of what the answer was in my mind. I mean, again, kind of as Ramona Singer from Real Housewives of New York would say, caduce to my family, anything I wanted to be or do was supported. So like I liked braiding bracelets. So my parents got me like a box of, yarn and stuff like the other girls had. So at lunch I would like braid bracelets and stuff, but I was just acutely aware that I was not like the other boys. It feels so cliche to connect it to being a little gay boy, but I wonder if that's it. It just feels like it would make sense to that. The only other thing I could think about is, of course, it reminds me of my IBS. Is there anything from it in general that you think like, oh, you should be doing XYZ or don't be doing XYZ kind of thing?
I think go out and do something where you're a beginner and you feel like a beginner.
I get that. That's an uncomfortable feeling for me.
Oh, okay.
That would be a good place to be.
And learning a language, even like programming, it doesn't have to be like that is a place where it's uncomfortable and you work through it. And then once you start like being able to say a sentence in another language, then it's like, I forgot what it was like not to know. Like when I first started, it felt like I was drowning in sounds, but now I can pick out a few of those sounds as words and it feels more concrete and safe. So something like that or Kundalini or whatever, a hobby. And then the other thing, see, your context is really helpful related to IBS, because I think a big thing, there's like an acceptance that feels like is being called for. It doesn't have to be okay. It doesn't have to be okay. It can be inconvenient and frustrating and annoying, and not just to other people, because it sounds like you like apologize or, disclaimer to other people. But you're also allowed to like, because that it could be an inconvenience to them. But I think in those moments where you feel compelled to put a disclaimer of like, oh, this is going to, not just IBS, but like, oh, this is going to be a bummer. Oh, this is uncomfortable. I'm so sorry to be a burden. All of those are moments when you feel the urge to do that, is to acknowledge where you feel like a bummer, you feel like an inconvenience, and you feel frustrated or annoyed or whatever it is. And then that's okay.
I love that. I can do that.
Even if it's just like a pause. And in that pause, you may realize like, you know what? I don't need to apologize yet. Let's see how they feel.
I get that. Interesting. I'm going to try doing that.
Okay. Yeah, those would be the two things that stick out. Okay. Well, thank you so much for letting me do a session, because it is very weird and I do still get very self-conscious.
I'm down for all this stuff. Thank you. I know I was in good hands with you, so I think honestly, if it was someone I didn't know, I would have been really nervous. Like, what are they going to do in my subconscious? Yeah. But I was obviously completely trust you. So thank you for taking care and holding space for me. And I really appreciate that.
And there you have it. Jamison came looking for the power to go after what he wants, the way that he encourages others to, and found the Ice Queen, who was frozen by her own self-consciousness. I love that about these healings. We ask to heal one thing and are often faced with whatever is blocking the path to connect with whatever it is we're asking about. On this journey, we watched Jamison as he went from playing the fool to leaping toward his destiny. After the session, I got the nudge to look up what a blanket of snow means since we spent so much time in that snowy meadow. I found that it was a symbol representing God's grace. And that is ultimately what is being called for, right? In this session, grace. Having grace with ourselves and feeling the grace of the universe as we trip and stumble and fumble and make fools of ourselves as we're learning to walk the earth and be human. I hope you find some magic from this episode and that it opens the door to grace as you journey forward on your path. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time on A Kind of Meadow with Rhiannon Vaughn.